Okay, so often for our customers, their reporting is mission critical. So therefore, having a disaster recovery plan is not optional. We'll review today some disaster scenarios, the limitations of VM backups, how to back up using BusinessObjects itself, the case for using 360 Suite for disaster recovery, and we'll also touch on synchronization and replication.
Excellent.
Yep. So disaster scenarios, you can see it's no surprise that the #1 issue is deleted or corrupted content. So Yasmina, can you share some scenarios you've encountered?
Yes, absolutely. So I broke the server. Oh my God, I've applied a patch, or a patch got automatically applied, and means that the software does not work anymore. That's something that I've encountered in the past as well. I actually used to work in technical support at BusinessObjects, SAP, back in the UK, before I moved to Canada. And that was the majority of severity 1 calls. Users calling because there was an update or patch that was installed over the weekend in production, and things just stopped working, and the important reports were not being sent out to the execs. So extremely stressful situations. Deleted, corrupted, critical content. That's a big one as well. And so far as that, yeah, anything that has to do with data, that's going to be a big issue. And if something is corrupted in BusinessObjects, once again, I've experienced that in the past. It's very difficult to retrieve it. I mean, you reach out to IT, you say, oh, well, I need to get a backup from this particular date because my report, my universe is corrupted. What you tend to get is, no, it's not possible. Or you just get an IT person who just takes you off the Christmas card list because it's definitely not something they want to have to go through. Malicious actions, again, for me, I think we've all seen that in the news with data breaches or anything like that, whether it happens internally within corporations or from an external attack. Statistically, only 5% of companies' folders are protected, and there are some numbers that I read recently as I was researching for this. So it's quite scary. And also, it said that 24% of data breaches are caused by human error, which makes sense. I mean, we're all fallible. And 90% of malware comes from emails. So when you think that almost $4 billion are spent in the US in terms of the cost of data breaches and malicious actions, that's definitely something to consider and bear in mind. Data center is not available, and we've had this occasion happening, unfortunately, where one of the data centers caught on fire. So yeah, when that happens, in order to assure business continuity is critical. And then the server is down, you might have a hardware failure, disk that does not work anymore, regular wear and tear on those kind of components. Obviously, it does happen, and you need to be safeguarded from those particular situations.
Limitations of VM backups. I'm aware it's not as straightforward as one would think, and it's not supported by SAP.
Absolutely, Don. It is definitely something that when we talk to some of our users who use virtualized environments, backing up the VMs that you have, it's a no-brainer. It's something that you'll definitely do. It's quite easy, whether it's on the on-premise virtualized environment or whether you're using a cloud hosted virtualized environment that can be automated. So it's pretty nice. However, if you have all your BOBJ resources on the same server, so you've got your system database, you've got your audit database, obviously you'll have your BusinessObjects installations, all the processing tiers, and you have your file repository server, which most probably will be on a separate SAN or NAS. You can afford some loss of content. So for example, let's say that you have those VM backups on a nightly basis. If you need to restore it, then that's not too much of a bother because the content that you have lost will be just the one created or modified since the last backup. So it can be, possibly a suitable solution. It becomes much more difficult if your business objects is distributed. So you've got multiple servers, possibly clustered. Which means, intrinsically that business objects is business critical because you don't want to have one point of failure by having everything on a single server, so you distribute it. Relying on VM backups is a mistake because to successfully recover from a disaster, you'll need to have all those resources not only backed up together at the same point in time, but restored as well together to the same point in time. And this inevitably will incur some loss of content. So, yeah, business objects. How do we go about it with business objects? So typically, you'll do a backup where you'll get LTNBR, all your content. Then you'll speak to the DBA so they can get a backup of the CMS and the audit databases. And then speak to IT for the file store, because that typically will be on a separate network share, and for the servers themselves. Again, it can be physical or virtualized. So good so far. However, when you come to restoring this, especially to a DR site, what do? So if you got it in-house, do you overwrite? So do you reuse the same server? Providing that server has not incurred any kind of hardware failure, which hopefully would have been replaced, but you can never be too sure. So do you overwrite? Do you restore to a different site or another server? You need to configure the SIA. You need to have the cluster key that you used in the original installation, because this is what allows you to configure the SIA. So as you can see, this whole process of restoring the CMS and the FRS to the DR side, updating the CMS, removing those links and references to the source system, those pointers to that server that needs to be updated. And this is something that SAP does not support. So if you go into your restore and then you start changing things, saying, well, this is not the source system anymore, this is a new source system, in terms of the CMS, and you mess up along the way, and you call it SAP support, they'll say, sorry, but what you've done is not supported by SAP. So it's quite painful. It's neither straightforward nor easily automated, unfortunately.
So why use 360 Suite for disaster recovery? Well, complex systems require a disaster recovery solution, and BusinessObjects is complex. 360 Suite allows for an easy restore and allows for automation. Those are two big reasons. And we have an incremental backup, which allows for that selective restore. It makes it pretty simple. So the task of restoring, you can see with BusinessObjects, is not comprehensive. There's a lot of things it does not do, which you can do with 360 Suite. And the last point is that you don't have to do all or nothing. You can do just selective, restore exactly what has failed, and it can be done pretty quickly. It's not a big task. It doesn't involve a lot of IT.
Absolutely, Don. And the thing I'd like to stress, and actually this is the case for all of our solutions, is that if you want to do a full orchestration of any workflows that you see, then you can integrate with an enterprise scheduler. So again, it makes things quite handy insofar as that we'll be looking, in a few slides about strategy for disaster recovery. But you can have that integrated with your enterprise scheduler so that you've got, let's say, a backup task running on a daily basis that can be integrated to the enterprise scheduler so that when this is finished, then it can be have a trigger for the next task and sequence, whatever that may be. And then comes the time to actually do the restore to the DR side that again can be orchestrated via an enterprise scheduler. So again, something to bear in mind. if you do use an enterprise scheduler and you really want to leverage the full capabilities of 360, or if in the future your company is considering getting an enterprise scheduler for workflow orchestration.
Yeah, and the checklist here, with 360 plus, the first backup is a full, then it is incremental. We'll replicate environments automatically. We can roll back and be selective because we do incremental backups. And then lastly, we have a real recycle bin, which means that anything can be restored, whether it's users, personal folders, security, publications. It's very comprehensive.
Yes, absolutely. And a funny story, we did have one of our users, if I'm getting the story right, the CEO deleted all of the objects in their inbox. So you can imagine it can create quite a lot of stress. So those kind of scenarios you can actually mitigate with 360 Suite. So if a user gets deleted, or if a user deletes their personal content, that can be very easily recovered, which is not something that can be done, with such ease with SAP BusinessObjects out of the box. So just a little bit, just a little visual to start on the synchronization with the DR site and the strategy where we can put in place. So when you install your 360 Plus web platform, it's going to be on the server. It can be a dedicated server. It can be on the server that actually has a business objects. It's very flexible. It's really up to you in terms of what resources you have available. What we need is just access to the libraries that comprise the business objects SDK, because this is again what we use in order to communicate with the server and to carry out a lot of those actions that we've seen, for example, in the previous session with the bulk capabilities. So that paradigm is the same throughout all of our solutions. So from this particular 360 Plus server, you can connect to various business objects CMSs. So again, you could have one server to rule them all in a way, and then you can do backups for your sandbox, your QA, your test, your pre-project production, and all of that from one environment. On the storage side, 360 Plus, I recommend storing on a network share now as a SAN. This is where those backup files are going to be located. So generally, they don't take more than 2 gigabytes in size, and that's because the way that our backup works is whenever you have a backup that runs for the object that it decides to back up, or that you decide to back up, it will create an individual BR file. And this is what makes it so flexible in terms of recovery of single objects from the landscape. And then in terms of the size of the storage, really, a lot of it is predicated on the size of the CMS, compressed, and obviously it depends on the number of backup versions that you want to keep for each one of your objects, and also on the frequency of the backup. So most of my users, they back up every day because they don't want to be in a situation where any content is lost, and then they want to be able to recover things really quickly. So, DR, how do we go about synchronization? So there are actually two use cases I just want to briefly talk about before I go into a demo. And the demo is going to be a little bit more comprehensive than just the DR side, because again, I want to make sure that everybody is aware of what 360 Plus can do. So the first scenario, and that's the one that has been used by quite a lot of our users, is the scheduling of daily backups. So do bear in mind that after we've done the first full backup, so you've got a blank system, so the first time you're backing up, this is going to back up everything that you choose to back up, which is fantastic. And then after that, let's say that the next day the backup kicks off, it's going to just grab the deltas. So only the changes that have been made since that first backup ran. And this just happens every day. Only the deltas are backed up daily. So that's why it's incremental and delta mode, as Don mentioned earlier in the presentation. So once we've got our daily backups set up, then and we know that they're working and that everything that we need is backed up, we can have a daily restore job. And all of those are scheduled, obviously. So again, we want to be as hands-off as possible. We want to automate as much of it as possible. So typically that daily restore will be content from the previous day, which is then going to be promoted to the DR site. So you've got your prod, you've got your daily backup, and then from that, you've got a daily restore that is going to be restoring your prod backup into the DR site on the N-1 fashion. And this is what we have in the replicate part of the slide on the bottom right. And then the outcome is that with that setup in mind, you can easily switch to your disaster recovery site. And this can be done either by switching the BusinessObjects URL that you give to the users. So this is simply a Tomcat switch if you are using Tomcat as a web application. Or if you are using a load balancer, then it's just pointing the load balancer to the disaster recovery site. So once again, all of those tasks can be scheduled, automated, and more importantly, they can easily be integrated with an enterprise scheduler for orchestration. So this is the main scenario here in terms of DR. However, for the sake of completeness, we did include something about replication of that backed up content. So there might be situations where we do want to create an exact copy of the BusinessObjects content. And this could be, again, in terms of keeping environments in sync. We might want to have our QA and our prod in sync, and that allows us to do that. So from the production, for example, you might piggyback on the QA or any other environment. Upgrades, you might want to not worry yourself with using a promotion management tool to move content from one BusinessObjects server to another, again, within the frame of the development lifecycle. Or if you're doing a migration, you might not want to go through that drudgery. Not that we can't do that, because we can in 360 Plus. We also do provide object promotion capabilities. However, you might want to go down the easy route and say, well, I just want to restore from one environment to another the content that I have. I'm not going to do promotions. Sandbox environment creation. So that's one that I quite like to use, because if I need to do a quick test in a pinch and I need to have data in a sandbox, then I can just select my folders, my universes, and my connections from production environment, and then create a little sandbox with that data already there without having to manually create anything or move content in the LCNBR file. And again, we have migrations, so they could be server migrations, physical servers, or software migrations. Right, so enough of me talking about slides. Let's just look at what we can do. So I'm going to be connecting to my BusinessObjects systems, but there's going to be two of them this time. So that's system number 1, and I'm going to connect to system number 2. And you'll see why in a moment. All right, so now I have 2 sessions, one for each environment. So again, 1 360 to rule them all. So before we do anything with DR, we need to have a backup. So in order to set that up, you need to go into your tasks and then your backup tasks. So this is the main area where you're going to be creating tasks. So there's a new task option here, and you've got a wizard that is going to walk you through the creation of a backup task. So you can select a session here. So again, we have 2 connections to 2 different CMSs, and then I can choose which one I want to back up. And I can set the frequency. So we have multiple options here. So I'm going to be using a recurring frequency of daily. However, just to show you, if you're going to be using an external job scheduler, an enterprise job scheduler, we have the external frequency, and it uses return codes. And we also have the possibility of pulling calendars from SAP BusinessObjects. And we can also, that's the last option, we can also use BusinessObjects events as a trigger for this backup task. So for our purpose, we're just going to do a recurring run, and I'm going to do it every end day, so every day, and I'm going to be doing it at 1 minute to midnight daily. Okay. So next, this is where I can choose what I want to back up. So what you get here are the containers, so to speak, so the buckets of types of objects. I'll show you in a minute, because I'm sure some of you might be wondering, well, I only want to back up some select content, and I'll show you how to do that as well, because it's possible. But here, we want to back up our entire environment for the purposes of a DR. So I'm going to grab my access levels, public folders, connection folders, universe folders, server groups, and users. Server group, that's pretty handy, again, because if you need to create, again, do that copy of that BusinessObjects environment, you might want to set up the servers with the same properties and the same parameters. It's not particularly fun having to do it from scratch unless you diligently documented it. So we keep 5 copies of the backups. So we do have 5 versions of the backup. So think of it as you've got your object, so it can be a document, a user, a folder, an access level, and hanging off like leaves, you would have copies of the backup. And these backup files can be restored too, so that the live version gets overwritten by one of those copies. For the sake of performance, we can run the backup of jobs in parallel. And then what you obviously want to do is to include the containers, subcontainers, and the content. Otherwise, you're just grabbing the top level folders. And then you have quite a lot of options. So for your users, I want to get my inboxes and the personal folders. I'm not sure if anybody really uses personal categories anymore, but it's there. And if there are some items that you want to exclude, you can do that as well. And then for your instances, once again, you are in a position where with 360 Plus, you can restore an individual instance. So if you get that call from a user that, oh my God, I deleted that report that I got in my inbox from yesterday, can I get it back? You'll be in a position to say, yes, I can. And they'll love you for it. But here you can say whether you want to back up all your instances. So again, be watchful with this, because if you've got millions of instances that date back to 10 years ago, you might not want to do that. Or you can just back up your recurring instances. Alternatively, you can just say, well, just want to, back up 10 instances, and that's it. You're only keeping that short history. Next is notification. So I say it's always a good thing to create yourself a notification for those tasks, because it allows you to see that this task is running. So we do have some dynamic parameters that allow you to compose the subject and the message without too much typing. And then you can choose the conditions where you're going to receive that notification. So it can be warning. I'm going to do successful. I'm going to do error. Okay, so those are the statuses that I want to receive notification for, and then I can add. If you want to receive another kind of notification, you can do that as well. The file system one, I'll just mention it because, again, for anybody who wants to leverage file-based events in BusinessObjects or who might want to integrate with an enterprise scheduler, it might be good to have this file, which then acts as a trigger to the next item in the workflow. So something to bear in mind. Integration with business objects for the orchestration trigger events. So if you do have business objects events that exist, they can be launched upon the success, warning, or errors of this particular backup task. And then we just have the summary screen here where we can see what we selected. So as straightforward as that, I'm just going to add it. You can see anything that is pending. If you do a right click, you get a contextual menu where you have a number of options. And I'm just going to quickly look at one of the finished tasks here. So right click again. I can run it again, I can update it, I can display the log. And I mentioned the log because our logs are very verbose insofar as it will tell you every single object that would have been backed up or processed, so you know exactly what is going on. And you do have a show summary option, which shows you all the elements that have been backed up. And if you do have any issues, then it will be highlighted here as well. So you will be able to see in the log files the errors. Typical errors during the backup task might be that the object does not exist in the file store anymore, whereas there's still a reference for it in the business objects repository. So a little repo scan might help to sanitize that and prevent any more errors from happening during the backup. So we've got a backup running. That's all good and well. We can do a number of things once those objects have been backed up. So if you've got an object that's been corrupted, then you can easily retrieve it. Or if you've got an object that you're not happy with that's been published in production, and you see that it's not the quality that you want, or there are mistakes, you can actually roll back. So a couple of things. You can, every single folder or contextual menu, once you've done a backup, will have a backups option. And here you can see the date of the backup. And you can do a restore, or you can do a remove. So depending on the context, you might have specific actions that you can perform. So for a folder here, you can duplicate, or you can also include subfolders, public folders, and public instances as well. And I did mention that earlier, that you can restore instances only, and this is the place where you can do that. And if we're going into a folder itself, when you do a right click on an object, this is where you can do a backup, a restore, sorry, of this particular object, and you can also do a comparison. So let's just quickly pop up a comparison. What this does, it works for webbies and it works for universes. And what this does is it takes the live copy that's on the system, that's why it takes a bit of time to render, and it compares it with the backup version that you have selected. And it highlights any errors or any changes that you might have between the two. So here we can see in the current document, so that's the one that is live in production, the title has been changed from this backup. We have a different setup in the query. So I've got an additional data provider. If I have variables, they'll be highlighted here. And for any reports, it will be similar to the view you get in the Launchpad, where you can see the blocks and the various report elements, the tables and the graphs, and etc. And then if there's anything that is inconsistent or different, it will show you that. So pretty handy to have, just so that you have a little bit of a hand on what is going on. And if I do want to restore, I can just click on the restore. I'm just going to do a restore. I don't want to duplicate. And I'm just going to get the document plus its instances and click on restore, which will launch a web action. It's finished. I've displayed the log, and it's giving me feedback that the version that I've selected has been restored live. So that's one way to utilize your backups in the contextual menus. Same for the actors, by the way, if you've got a change to a specific user that's been made and you want to be able to restore that to a previous good known version, you can do that. For the time being, I'm going to delete that. the users, you'll see business objects, once you delete a user, you can't get it back. Another option to leverage the backups is in the recycle bin. So this is why I deleted the user, you see. Because here we have an option to search in the types of documents, types of folders, types of users, categories, etc., that we might have deleted, and we want to be able to retrieve it. So I'm going to grab my users. I can do a fuzzy search, just because I'm lazy like that. And I've got this demo 1 user, and I've got a few more, but I'm interested in demo 1. So I'm going to do a right click, and I've got 5 backups. So that's actually the limit that I've set. And I want to restore to this version. And I'm offered to restore the personal folders and the inboxes. I'm not interested in personal categories. And I can get personal instances as well. That's it. So I'm going to click on restore. A web action is triggered. The log tells me what has been restored. And if I go into my users, here it is again. So a few ways to leverage backups. And now onto the rollbacks and the disaster recovery. There's a rollback task which lives under the tasks menu, just below the backup tasks. And in this window, this is where you can set your daily rollback task, just like we've talked about in the slides. So if you remember, let me just go back a bit on the slides. We're going to be doing a replication, so of only the previous day, just 1 day worth of backup onto our DR site. So the frequency will be recurring, happen daily. I'm going to do it at 3 in the morning. I just want to give my backup some time. And now this is where this changes a little bit from what we've seen so far. So I'm just going to set 1 day. So essentially, I'm connected to my DR site here. I want to grab 1 day's worth of content that's been backed up, and I want to replicate from my training environment, which is where I've been running daily backups as well. So for the sake of real life, that SAP 4.2 training will be my prod, and this SAP BI 4.2 demo will be my DR system. And I'm just injecting every day 1 day's worth of backup to restore. So that's one way of doing it. Now, if you recall, we also had this particular option of creating an exact copy for a variety of reasons. I might want to do that and spin myself up a sandbox environment in which I have a year's worth of backups from this training environment. However, I don't want everything. You know, I've got the security already set up, so I can play around with that on there. So I don't want my access levels, and business use, I don't use them. Yeah, I'm interested in my connections, definitely. I have to change the security a bit on it, but that's not a problem. I do want my public, no, actually, I don't want my public categories because I don't use those. Public folders, absolutely. Quaz, I don't use that anymore. Remote connection folders, not interested. Replication list, not interested. Server groups, definitely not. I don't want to mess up my servers. Universes, excellent. User groups, nah, I'm not interested. I already have security on there. And this is what it would take just to customize that restoration / replication job just to have the elements that you want in order to create a copy of specific data into another business objects environment. So I'm just going to go back to my slides. So having said that, it's always good to have a bit of a real life, feel for how would this work, what are the numbers, how successful is it. So we do have a medical center customer that we've been working with for a very long time. And they've been utilizing the 360 plus backup, restore, disaster recovery as part of their DR strategy. So they're not an enormous business objects by any stretch of the imagination, but they're not tiny either. So just a few numbers to give some context. 20,000 reports, 100,000 instances, about 300 gigabytes of FRS, both input output, and almost 2,000 users. So the first time they installed 360 plus and then they ran a backup task, it took about 13 hours. So remember again, this is a first full backup. It's going to take a bit of time. Afterwards, as Don mentioned, it's going to be delta incremental, only the changes will be grabbed. And this is reflected on the third line here that says you've got daily backups that take an hour after that full backup. And now the full restore to the DR site took 53 hours. So bearing in mind that the DR site is not adjacent to their business object server, and then you've got network latency, the IOPS of the servers, all that kind of stuff that tends to impact the sending of data packages across the network. But that's not too bad when you think that fair chunk of data that is being sent. So 53 hours, that's quite good. So that's the first time they actually implemented the restore. But then after the daily restores, as we've seen in the demo, only took an hour again. So in terms of performance, it's not too bad, I would say. So I do hope that those kind of metrics and numbers help you maybe extrapolate it to what you have in house to give you an idea of what the process could be and how long it would take to actually get this going.
Thanks for that demo. Right, yeah. So what's the value? Well, time savings is a huge value because we can automate the backup and DR process and ensure high availability. As I mentioned, for a lot of organizations, reporting is mission critical. So that's key from an administrative point of view. From the manager's point of view, reduce cost. It's going to take a lot less resources to do a restore than it will with BOBJ alone. And as mentioned, the automation component. From the business side, governance and compliance are met with this solution, as well as business continuity for COOP. So the overall value to the organization is, you've got business objects, you've made the investment, why not make it work better? So optimize your resources and get more out of the solution you have. With 360 plus, backup and restore is not a big project. It's pretty easy to do. Okay, so one last poll. What is your interest level in this webinar topic today? And we had this, if you were with us earlier, the same options. Are you just increasing your knowledge? You don't have an immediate need, but would like to see a demo. You're planning a project and would like to schedule a demo, or you're planning a project and would like to trial 360 plus in this case for the backup. And we'll give it a few seconds. All right, Yasmina, did you want to cut it off?
Yes, so do we have the results from the poll in? Yep, excellent. Fantastic. No, that's not a problem. I was just actually reading some of the questions because we have quite a few that come through, which is quite exciting. So yeah, we've got plenty of time to go through them.
Okay, and we'll get to that in a moment. This page here is just a lot more information on this particular subject that when you get the presentation, you can dive in and learn some more.
Excellent. Thank you, Don. So maybe we can start looking at the questions because there are quite a few. So we've got Larry. Hi, Larry. Hope you're doing well. So Larry is asking, is there a shorter path than a full rollback, which can be very time consuming if implementing DR after BOBJ has been in place for a long time? That's an interesting question. I would approach it from the point of view that you would, obviously you got long-standing BOBJ, but you would have to do a first backup and a first rollback to get the ball started. So let me just cycle back to the strategy, this one. So you definitely will need to have that initial backup scheduled. And like we've seen with the medical center, that's what took the most time because it was quite a bit of content. And then you would have to have an initial restore job also scheduled. And that, again, will take a bit of time. But after that, when those schedules run again for both the backup and the restore, you will only be backing up and subsequently restoring the changes that would have been made. So in the production, let's say that you've done a backup last night, and in the meantime, you've had 20 reports that have been modified. The restore will only grab those 20 modifications. It's not going to be restoring everything from scratch again. And this is that delta incremental, which is built into the software that allows this particular capability to happen. Because obviously you don't want to have to back up and restore everything from scratch every single time. Indeed, it will take a lot of time and a lot of resources. So hopefully, Larry, this has answered your question. If not, please ping us and then we can discuss it on the one-to-one in more detail.
Yep, Yasmina, I was just going to say this. We got a second question from Stephen, which says, once the full backup is completed, how do we prevent prod schedules from running in DR? Same for incremental backups for reoccurring instances.
That's an excellent question. So you could pause them if that's something that you could consider. And in 360 view, we actually have a capability that allows you to do this in bulk, which is quite handy. So let me just select a folder, and it's just going to be a quick walkthrough because, again, we're pressed for time. But essentially, if you select the folders or maybe the root folder, if you've got lots and lots of schedules, you just grab the root folder, and then you can do a public folder, recurring instances. So that will be extracting the information for all your recurring instances. You can manipulate this data in the Excel spreadsheet, and one of the columns that you can manipulate is the start or the status of that recurring instance. So you can say just paused, and in that way they're not going to be running in your DR environment. And the option to do that under the administration tab, after you've massaged the data in the Excel from the export, is the update recurring instances. So that allows you to do that. And if I'm not mistaken, you can also do it for personal folders. So hopefully that answers your question, Stephen.
Yeah, the next question is from Carmen. He's asking, what tool in the 360 suite do we need for this? And that answer is 360 Plus. We have a question from Cassandra. says, would exclude jobs be considered exclude schedules?
Hi, Cassandra. Good question. Exclude jobs would exclude, let me give you a tangible example. If you have eyes, you might have 360 eyes jobs. It would exclude those kind of jobs, not the scheduling jobs. So any kind of programmatic SDK or program that you have or script that you have stored in BusinessObjects to do something within the platform, those will be the ones that are excluded. Same with the probes. If you use some of the monitoring in BusinessObjects, those would be excluded as well.
Okay, we've got another question from Stephen. When backing up connections, how do we keep Oracle TNS changes in ODBC 32, ODBC 64 changes in sync between prod and DR with 360?
So for the updating of the connections, there is in 360 view connections option, and for all of those relational connections, you can again document them, and then in the administration, I know it's not that intuitive, but believe me on that, if you extract and export your connections to Excel, you will be able to modify them and then import them back using the administration tasks of import connections. It will not change what has been defined on the server though. So if the TNS, the ORA file needs to be changed, and if the ODBC via the data source names needs to be changed, that needs to be done on the server. 360 does not interact with the Windows or Linux server settings to modify those.
Okay, the next question is from Larry. Not sure if I fully understand it, but when doing the compare in the restore as shown, how controlled can we make access to that? Should it not be end users?
Yes, I see what you mean. So typically the compare would be on documents that the user has access to only. You would not be, able to, I mean, you're the administrator, so you can see everything. But if I only have a set number of folders and documents that I can see, then I should be able to do the compare in there only. However, you can also set up some security on the 360 application, and I've got all the licenses, so that's why you've seen quite a lot. So you might have a different view on your environment. But this security leverages the security from BusinessObjects. So we're not creating anything new. We're using the access levels that are already in BusinessObjects. And here you can actually say what users can or can't see and what actions they can actually take. So you might want to create a custom access level, same paradigm as in BusinessObjects, where the user is allowed to log in, and in the public folders, they'll only be able to view and document. They won't be able to administer and backup. And the backup, for example, that contains a comparison piece. So if they don't have access to this option, they won't be able to compare, if you do want to remove that right for them.